You think you understand the French Revolution? You imagine the guillotine, that towering blade crashing down. Forget the machine. What you're about to hear is one of the most unthinkable executions in history, carried out by a mob using nothing but their own hands. This is the story of Princess de Lamballe, the closest friend of Marie Antoinette. What was done to her on September 3rd, 1792, defies belief. We are going to separate what is absolutely verified from the gruesome legends that still circulate today. This is a story of extreme loyalty, raw terror, and how quickly a human being can be transformed into a symbol of hatred that people feel compelled to destroy. Before she became a target marked for death, she was a real person living a life almost too dramatic to imagine. Marie-Thérèse Louise of Savoy-Carignan was born in Italy in 1749 into immense wealth and privilege. At just 17, she married the Prince de Lamballe, one of the richest men in France. But tragedy struck almost immediately. Within a year, her husband was dead, leaving her a widow at only 18. That loss carried her straight into the heart of the French court at Versailles, where she met another young foreign woman navigating the same hostile world, Marie Antoinette. Their bond was instant and intense. In a palace full of performance and deception, their friendship was genuine. When Marie Antoinette became queen, she appointed Lamballe superintendent of her household, an enormously powerful and intimate position. She wasn't merely a court official, she was trusted family, but that closeness came with a deadly cost. As public hatred toward the queen exploded, that hatred spread to everyone around her. Filthy pamphlets flooded Paris, accusing the queen's inner circle of every imaginable crime. Lamballe's close friendship with Marie Antoinette was twisted into lurid rumors and obscene accusations, fueling public rage. The quiet, devoted companion was reinvented as a villain, a corrupting force, an Austrian agent, an enemy of France. A target was placed on her back, and the situation was about to spiral out of control. When the Bastille fell in 1789, the world of French royalty collapsed overnight. Nobles fled the country in terror, escaping wherever they could. Lamballe was safe in London. Everyone urged her to stay there, far from the chaos. But her loyalty to Marie Antoinette was unshakable. The queen was in danger, and Lamballe believed her duty was to stand beside her. Marie Antoinette begged her to return, writing that she could not live or die without her. Knowing exactly what awaited her, Lamballe wrote her will and returned to Paris, fully aware she was likely walking toward her own death. She was present during the royal family's failed escape. She endured the storming of the palace on June 20th, 1792. Witnesses later said that even as violence erupted around them, Lamballe showed no concern for herself, only fear for the queen's safety. That devotion would seal her fate. On August 10th, 1792, the monarchy was officially destroyed. The royal family was imprisoned in the Temple, while Lamballe was torn away and thrown into La Force prison, one of the most brutal, filthy, and terrifying prisons in Paris. By the end of August, the city was gripped by hysteria. Enemy armies were advancing, threatening to annihilate Paris if harm came to the royal family. Instead of calming the revolutionaries, this pushed them into madness. They became convinced that traitors and royalist spies were hiding inside the prisons, waiting to strike. Revolutionary leaders called for relentless action, and restraint vanished. On September 2nd, the slaughter began. For 5 days, armed mobs stormed the prisons, launching one of the bloodiest killing sprees in European history. Prisoners were dragged out, subjected to sham trials lasting seconds, and butchered in courtyards slick with blood. The streets ran red, and trapped in the center of this nightmare was Princess de Lamballe, listening to the screams echo through the prison walls. She was no ordinary inmate, she was the ultimate symbol. Everything the mob despised embodied in one person. It was inevitable they would come for her. On the morning of September 3rd, they did. Guards entered her cell after a night of non-stop killing. It was time for her to face the so-called tribunal. This was not justice. It was a farce. Men seated at a table stained with blood and wine, deciding in moments who would live and who would die. When Lamballe was led inside, she nearly collapsed at the sight of bodies stacked across the courtyard. She was questioned briefly and remained composed throughout. Then came the final demand. She was ordered to swear loyalty to liberty and equality, and to declare hatred for the king and the queen. This was her last chance to survive, and she refused. She said she could willingly swear to the first, but could not swear to the second, because it was not in her heart. A man beside her warned that refusal meant death, but she would not betray her friend. Another account records her saying that whether she died sooner or later made no difference, that she had already offered up her life. The decision came instantly. The judge announced that Madame was to be set at liberty. It sounded like mercy, but it was not. The phrase was a signal to the crowd outside. It meant she was being handed over. She was forced through the door and straight into the waiting mob. The courtyard had become a slaughter ground, littered with corpses. Faces twisted with fury closed in around her. This is where history must be separated from rumor, yet even the confirmed facts are shocking. What is certain is that she was murdered. Witnesses described a small woman dressed in white standing alone for a brief moment. Then a blow, likely from a pike or hammer, struck the back of her head. Her cap fell away, and her long, fair hair spilled down. A second udar landed on her forehead, and she collapsed. What followed was chaos. The crowd rushed her, stabbing and beating her with pikes and sabers until she was dead. It was savage, frantic, and mercifully brief, but it did not end there. Her head was cut from her body in a final act of humiliation. Her corpse was stripped naked and left in the street. Her remains were never formally recovered. These facts are not disputed. She was beaten, decapitated, and discarded because she refused to renounce her loyalty. That truth alone is horrifying. What came after, and the legends that grew from it, are even more disturbing. The killing itself was not enough. Her death was turned into a spectacle. Her severed head was mounted on a pike and carried through the streets of Paris in a grotesque procession. The destination was the Temple prison. The intention was clear, to force Marie Antoinette to confront what had been done to her closest friend. It was calculated psychological torture. When the mob reached the prison, they gathered beneath the windows and shouted for the queen to come out and look. Some later rumors claimed they demanded she kiss the lifeless lips. Inside the prison, the noise was unmistakable. The king's valet recognized the head immediately. As questions were asked, guards hurried to block the windows. It is uncertain whether she actually saw it. What is certain is that a guard told her directly that the crowd was trying to show her the head of the Princess de Lamballe. Hearing that alone shattered her. She screamed and collapsed, completely unconscious. Accounts say she cried through the night. The mob had achieved its purpose. They inflicted a deep psychological wound, killing one woman to torment another. The image of her friend's head displayed in the streets would haunt her for the rest of her life. The verified history is horrific enough, yet the myths that followed would push the story into even darker territory. So let's strip the story back to what can actually be proven. Thus, the most persistent and lurid myth surrounding her death claims her body was sexually desecrated, that she was raped, her breasts cut off, and her genitals mutilated. Almost none of this holds up under scrutiny. Contemporary sources, including accounts written by people who despised her, make no mention of such acts. These graphic details appeared later, largely as royalist propaganda, designed to portray the revolutionaries as inhuman beasts. In fact, there is an official inventory of items found in her pockets, which strongly suggests her body was still clothed at that stage. Another enduring rumor claims her heart was torn out and eaten. This supposed act of cannibalism has no credible evidence behind it whatsoever, and appears to have been invented purely for shock value. Other myths cling just as stubbornly to the story. One claims her severed head was taken to a hairdresser to be powdered and styled so it would look presentable when shown to the queen. That never happened. Another insists she hid a secret message for Marie Antoinette in her hair, a dramatic and romantic idea with no historical proof. And perhaps the most famous myth of all is that Marie Antoinette was forced to kiss the lips of her friend's severed head. Multiple reliable accounts confirm this did not occur. The queen may have been told what the mob was doing, and that alone was enough to make her collapse. But the infamous scene itself belongs to fiction, not history. These stories survived because propaganda thrives on horror, and because people are drawn to grotesque tales that push events beyond the limits of reality. But by focusing on the fabricated horrors, we risk losing sight of the real woman at the center of this tragedy. The killing of Princess de Lamballe was not a formal execution. It was a lynching. It was a ritualized murder, carried out by a crowd that no longer saw her as a human being, but as a symbol. Her death remains one of the most infamous episodes of the French Revolution, not because of invented cannibalism or lurid fantasies, but because of what actually happened. She returned to a city consumed by violence out of loyalty to her friend. She faced a sham tribunal, refused to renounce her principles, and was deliberately handed over to a mob to be beaten to death and decapitated. Her severed head was then used as a tool of psychological warfare. The reality is chilling enough without embellishment. It shows how quickly political rage can erase empathy, how easily a crowd can transform into a death squad, and how a human life can be reduced to a single hated idea. The story of Princess de Lamballe is a sobering reminder of the true cost of revolution, of what happens when personal loyalty collides with ideological fury. The most horrifying parts of her story are not the myths invented later, but the verified facts themselves. She remains a tragic figure, remembered less for who she was than for the brutality of how she died. What do you find most shocking about the true story of Princess de Lamballe, and do you think history should focus more on verified facts, or on the powerful myths that grow around them?